Assalamualaikum and hello everyone. Welcome back to Health and Earth podcast. I'm Haniey
And I'm Raudhah.
and I think it is not too late to say Happy June everyone. And did you guys know that June is the awareness month of Myasthenia Gravis? Raudhah, did you know what is Myasthenia Gravis disease?
As far as I know, Myasthenia Gravis is a Latin expression which literally means grave muscle weakness. So this disease is perfectly described as a weakness that happens when this autoimmune disease affects our skeletal muscles. So that is just a brief about the Myasthenia Gravis. Maybe we can discuss later in more detail so that we all know what is this disease.
And did you guys know that this awareness happens every year in June, and it is to promote research and fundraising to support individuals and caregivers of Myasthenia Gravis, or we can call it MG. And Raudhah, the theme for 2022 Myasthenia Gravis awareness is turning awareness into action. We want to turn the awareness about this disease into action and collect the fundraising and to give awareness to everyone about this rare autoimmune disease.
Yeah. So, according to University of Malaya Medical Center UMMC consultant neurologist Professor Dr. Goh Kian Jin, he explained that Myasthenia Gravis is an autoimmune disease in which the body's immune system, which is supposed to function against infection that enters our body and foreign matter, it identifies its own muscle receptors as foreign substances and attacks them by releasing antibodies. Okay, honey, basically, people with Myasthenia Gravis, they might wake up feeling fine at the start of the day, but they will get progressively weaker as the day goes on. And by the end of the day, they might feel like very weak. So sometimes even they will get getting weaker with repetitive movements like chopping vegetables or just by walking or anything activities that related to our muscles.
And I just heard that Myasthenia Gravis usually affect the women in their 20s and 30s, and also the men in their 60s and 70s. So we can call that even the Myasthenia Gravis is a rare autoimmune disease, but it usually attacks our mom, our dad, and our grandparents. Even we in the 20s supposed to know about this disease because we might get this.
So, to better understand Myasthenia Gravis, let's review normal muscle contraction but at the cellular level. First, you've got your motor neurons that release the neurotransmitter acetylcholine at the neuromuscular junction, which then binds to nicotinic acetylcholine receptors on muscle cell membranes. Binding of acetylcholine to its receptor activates a chain reaction in the muscle cell, resulting in muscle contraction.
But what happens in Myasthenia Gravis? Well, remember that it's an autoimmune disease, and Myasthenia Gravis were categorized as a type 2 hypersensitivity. In each case, a type 2 hypersensitivity reaction involves a target cell with antigen expressed on its surface and the antibodies that bind to these antigens. The antibody-antigen binding activates certain mechanisms that ultimately damage the target cell. Myasthenia gravis is related to the target cell dysfunction mechanism in type 2 hypersensitivity reaction. The autoimmune antibodies are being produced which can cause problems at the neuromuscular junctions. In this case, the patient's B cell inappropriately make antibodies that bind to nicotinic acetylcholine receptors on the muscle cells. The antibodies either block the binding of the acetylcholine or destroy the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. These actions limit the communication between the neuron and skeletal muscles, and this will lead to muscle weakness.
These antibodies also activate the complement system within the neuromuscular junction. The activation of the complement system causes inflammation and destruction of the muscle cells and reduce the amount of acetylcholine receptors on the surface of muscle cells. A minority of people with Myasthenia gravis, which is about 15% of cases, produce another type of antibodies against muscle-specific kinase, which is shortened to MuSK, and antibodies against low-density lipoprotein receptor-related protein 4 or LRP4. MuSK and LRP4 are important proteins for the creation and organization of the acetylcholine receptor. The destruction of these proteins inside of muscle cells instead of the destruction of nicotinic acetylcholine receptors on the muscle cell surface by the autoantibodies leads to inadequate acetylcholine receptors being created and organized, and this causes the symptoms of myasthenia gravis.
Alright, just now we are talking about the development of Myasthenia Gravis disease, and now we want to talk about the symptoms. Based on University Malaya Medical Center, senior consultant neurologist Dr. Nortina Shahrizaila, she said that this Myasthenia Gravis disease can attack our muscles group in our bodies, when the disease attack our eye muscles, it can make our vision become blurred and double, and when the disease attacks our face and neck muscles, it can make us difficult to swallow and even to speak. And when the disease attack our arm and leg, it will make us too difficult to stand and even to sit. And lastly, worst case symptoms, when the disease attack our chest muscle, it can make the patient become shortness of breath, and worst case, it can bring to death.
Symptoms most affect the proximal muscles and small muscles of the head and neck. So this leads to extraocular muscle weakness, which causes double vision. We call this diplopia. Eyelid muscle weakness, which causes drooping of the eyelids, and we call this ptosis. Weakness of the facial movements, difficulties in swallowing. They also can get fatigue in the jaw, and they can also develop slurred speech.
In some cases, if certain muscles are affected, myasthenic patients can experience a myasthenic crisis. What is myasthenic crisis? A myasthenic crisis is a severe complication of myasthenia gravis and can be life-threatening. An example of this might be a decreased function of the muscles that control breathing.
Okay guys, we have already talked about the symptoms, the developments of Myasthenia Gravis, and did you guys know that 15 to 20% of Myasthenia Gravis patients have the rate of mortality? It can bring to death. But don't worry guys, don't worry because of the advanced allergy, advanced biotechnology and pharmaceutical that we have right now, all the doctors and scientists have created medications to help reduce the death of Myasthenia Gravis patients.
One type of medication is an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor, like neostigmine or pyridostigmine. Acetylcholinesterase is an enzyme that degrades acetylcholine. So, acetylcholinesterase inhibitors stop acetylcholinesterase from breaking down acetylcholine, and this will increase the amount of acetylcholine at the neuromuscular junction, thus improve the symptoms. Myasthenia gravis is also can be treated with immunosuppressive drugs, such as with prednisone or steroids or other thiopurine that can suppress the production of harmful antibodies, and this will improve the condition. And finally, a lot of people with myasthenia gravis undergo surgical removal of the thymus. This seems to reduce the muscle weakness symptoms even in people that don't appear to have any problems with the thymus gland itself. It is possible that this is because the helper T cells, which originate in the thymus, help B cells make antibodies to the acetylcholine receptor.
There are some options for monoclonal antibodies that can improve myasthenia gravis. The first is rituximab, which is a monoclonal antibody that targets B cells. There's also a monoclonal antibody called eculizumab, which targets complement proteins C5, and this could potentially prevent the complement activation that's caused by the acetylcholine receptor antibodies and prevent the destruction of the acetylcholine receptors.
Alright, as a quick review about myasthenia gravis, it is an autoimmune disorder where the body produces antibodies and target nicotinic acetylcholine receptors on the surface of the muscle cells.
And based on what we discussed just now, and we know that the antibodies will block the receptors and can lead to muscle weakness, and in severe cases, it can bring to death. So in this Myasthenia Gravis Awareness Month in this June, we urge everyone to check on your beloved ones, especially on our own self from this symptom, because we know that prevention is better than cure.
Okay, that's right, Haniey. So even though it is a rare disease, but it still can happen to us and anyone around us.
Yeah, and that's correct, Raudhah. And I think that's the end of our podcast today. We have already talked about our Myasthenia Gravis for this month. We will see you guys again in our next podcast in next month. Bye!